You know, the way we run organizations, and we kind of have a word for that, it's bureaucracy. It basically means there's a lot of power at the top and not much at the bottom, right? That's how our organizations are built. Well, that's a product of something we did about 150 years ago, because when we first started bringing employees to work in large organizations, most of those employees were illiterate. Information was very hard to move, expensive to move, and change was kind of glacial. So in that environment, we basically built organizations where the thinkers were at the top, the doers were at the bottom, where information trickled up and power trickled down. And that model disenfranchises most employees. Most employees going to work today, they do not believe that they can change their work environment. They have no voice in hiring the people around them. They don't think they have any contribution to make in shaping the strategy or the direction of their organization. They can't really even do much to launch an experiment or change the way they do their own job. And there's a lot of data that backs that up. But the net effect of that is organizations squander an enormous amount of human capacity. So if you think about what people bring to work, you bring your obedience to work. There's certain rules we all have to follow. Maybe you bring your diligence, you work hard till the job is done, and you bring your intellect. You're smart and you apply your knowledge. So those things are important, but in the creative economy, what's really important is people who have initiative, who don't wait until they're asked. They see a problem, they see an opportunity, off they go, they start to solve it. People who bring their creativity to work, they're learning from other places and asking questions why and challenging conventional wisdom. And finally, people who are passionate about what they do, that motivates them just to go that extra mile. And if you think about those capabilities, initiative, creativity, and passion, those are things that cannot be commanded. No manager can say, please be more passionate. I mean, you can, but it's going to do no difference.
Right.
Those are gifts that people either bring to work every day or they don't. And all the data says they don't. Most people are there physically, but they've not brought all their creativity, their passion, their initiative to work. Our organizations are poorer for it. Those individuals are poorer for it because they are not able to bring all of their humanity to the workplace. That, I think, needs to change for their sake and the sake of our organizations.
And your passion for that stems from where?
My passion, I will tell you several different places it comes from. First of all, I believe every human being has the right to develop and profit from their own unique gifts. And I think that our top-down organizations, which treat human beings as resources, as movable pieces, leaders who assume that commodity jobs are filled with commodity people, I think that robs employees of that dignity and the chance for them to grow, number one. Number two, I think it impoverishes our organizations. You know, we exist in a world today where customers expect you to be constantly innovating, constantly doing new things, where if you're not reinventing yourself, you are going to be irrelevant in a period of months. That means, as an organization, you cannot afford to waste an iota of that human creativity, and right now we do. So I'm passionate for employees, I'm passionate for the organizations, and I'm passionate for society at large. You know, in the United States and around the world, in the developing world, productivity growth is going down. And that's a problem, because that means we have more income stagnation, it's creating more income inequality, it means the rise of populism. And I think one of the most powerful potential ways of raising that productivity, of getting more productivity growth, is starting to tap into the creative potential that exists inside of every single employee. Teaching them how to think like business innovators, giving them the ability to start to experiment where they are. I know this can be done. I can tell the organizations where it's being done, it's just not being done enough.
Now, I do see I've seen your track record and those companies that you've given those thoughts to and implemented and how it benefited them. Let's take an organization that's a fast food. We're going to take a fast food restaurant. Where and how does that, what you're talking about, creativity, innovation, there's only so much of that you can do, I would think, as an employee, and there has to be some form of organizational structure. So thinking outside of the box in a fast food environment, how would that work?
Well, let me give you an example. Fast food is a great example, because every one of those outlets should be its own little laboratory. Every one of those outlets, they have their own P&L. They should feel like a team that is really driving, that's their business. Now, whether the leader in that little franchise treats people like that, that's a different question. But if you're running that business, the question you have to ask is, you have employees every day who are meeting the customer. So I want to spend time every week sitting down with them. You know, what did you see? Where did we create a problem for a customer that we didn't need to create? Where do you see their frustration? Where do you see their anxiety? What would be an idea about how to change that? I would ask those frontline employees, you guys shop in other places, you go other places, where do you see other retailers, other fast food, other businesses innovating in ways that maybe we should copy? What are you learning from there? I would thoroughly say, what do you see about what we do that you think is just stupid? The way we do something,
Right.
a rule,
Right.
a procedure, says that doesn't make any sense. How would you change that? So it's an attitude where you look at every human being as a potential innovator, and it's clear to them that you're curious about their ideas. It's curious about, some companies are pretty good at this. Toyota's employees in Japan come up with more than 1 million improvement suggestions every year.
And so what you're saying, and what you're obviously is not suggesting, is kind of frank, is even in that environment where the organization, the structure has to be there because it's a fast food restaurant, just the thought or the idea of asking what is your opinion in terms of how we can do this better brings in that involvement and that
Sure.
thinking.
We built a little platform, nothing very sophisticated, but we built an online collaborative platform in one of the most successful retailers in the world. They have hundreds of stores around the world and tens of thousands of employees. And we put out challenges just like the ones I just, what did you see today? What, where was the customer anxious? Where were they disappointed? What was behind that? What's your idea on how to change that? And suddenly you have thousands of ideas flowing through the organization. You can start to see the patterns. Like many of our outlets are experiencing that. So how do we change that? And I think you just have, and what was surprising and a bit sad is most of those employees had never been asked those questions before. They were just there as doers, flip the burgers or sell whatever they're selling, but they did not feel like the company was investing or cared about their creative capacity.
Got it. Okay, so you hear that. For anyone that's going to watch this video, at the top, just ask those down at the bottom their opinions, even if there's no major creative space. Okay, I want to go into just the book area. Mm-hmm. There are comments and some of your famous quotes that I'm just wow about, and I would like for you to elaborate if you do not mind. This came from, and then you probably know this already, but anyway, this came from the forward page of the forward section of a book. I think it was The Open Organization.
Yes, sure.
And
great book by Jim Whitehurst.
Exactly.
Highly recommend it.
Exactly. Okay, so here's what you bullet pointed in that. Contributions will matter more than credentials. People pride on their credentials. The title, I did this, and this. And you made this reference in terms of organizations that are fit for the future.
Yes.
And this is the bullet list, the bullet point. And contributions will matter more than credentials for organizations that will have some future success.
Yep. So I think, credentials are important.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody's going to open you up and remove an appendix, you want to see the diploma on the wall,
Exactly.
right? Let's be clear.
Okay.
I'm not against credentials.
Okay.
But I think what you want to do is give employees the chance to thrive and move beyond the credentials. Today when you go online and you watch a funny video or you see a heart-rending post or whatever, you don't ask, did somebody go to film school or did they go to journalism school? You said, did it move me? Is it good? And I think, a lot of times credentials can be a way of ignoring gifts that people have that don't fit our particular model of what that person should be. And so, I believe in excellence. I believe in meritocracy. I believe that, I want to work around people who are super capable and very good at what they do. But that is not always earmarked by a credential, and increasingly not. You look in some developing countries now where, the whole idea of a university degree may disappear. You're going to still take courses. You're going to have to pass those. You're going to have to do project work. But the idea that you get this one thing that says you're an expert, maybe that's, maybe we're going to move in a different direction. I don't know. But for sure, inside of our organizations, people have to have a chance to build their skills, to exhibit those, and not be limited. But, well, wait a minute, you never got an MBA, or you didn't do this. And so that's what I see in, for example, a company like Nucor, America's most profitable and one of the world's most innovative steel companies, where you have like so-called blue-collar frontline employees who are running hundreds of experiments a year, who build this deep tacit knowledge about the intricacies of steel making, who know far more about that than their managers do. And that's an environment in which they've been encouraged to build their skills, their capabilities. I think every human being wants to grow in that way, but it's not limited by, well, by the way, you never went to college.
Right, exactly. Your famous quote, one of them, you have, this one is just, they pull some. The biggest barriers to strategic renewal are almost always top management's unexamined beliefs.
Yep.
Unexamined beliefs.
So look at the situation the cable television industry is in right now. It's slowly dying.
Yeah.
I think for the first time there are more Americans now watching TV streaming than watching over cable. We could see this coming for the last 20 years. 20 years ago and more, AT&T predicted sometime around now we'd be able to deliver full motion video into the homes. You could see this coming. So why is cable television behind? Because they believed they were locked into an old way of thinking. We package up all of these hundreds of channels. We sell them to you even though you only watch a dozen. Whoever you are, you're going to pay $6 or $7 every month for ESPN, even if you never watch sports. That was a business model. It worked for them. And you know, we tend to fall in love with what we know and what's familiar to us. The leaders built that old model. It feels like theirs. And so the fundamental challenge of change is that you have to be able to write off your own depreciating intellectual capital. What do you believe that's really no longer true? That's just a legacy. And I think leaders have a very hard time, you know, they're supposed to know everything. They built that old model. They got to their positions because they were expert in running it. And now you're saying that doesn't work anymore. So that's why I think that in any organization, the conversation about strategy in the future cannot be dominated by people at the top.
So how do these people that are at the top go into this place of examining their beliefs and looking at the reality versus what's in their mind of what's worked for the past 50 years? How do they come out of that zone?
A couple of things. First of all, you need to make an investment every year in your own time, in your own calendar, where you put yourself in places where you have the chance to be surprised. You have to go out and hunt down the things that are changing, and that may mean going look at what's going on in entrepreneurship and super apps in China. It may be coming out to Silicon Valley. It may be somewhere else. But you really have to make an investment in your own learning, because often, even if you have young people telling you, hey, watch out, this is happening, if you have no corroborating evidence, if you haven't seen it for yourself, you tend to discount that. So you have to, you know, in a sense, the older you get, the more time you need to take to connect with the future and make sure you're doing that as a conscious activity. Number two, you have to be very careful that in conversations, your power does not shut down the conversation. You know, I go into so many meetings and I see senior leaders, and they'll say, I don't believe that or whatever. And everybody around the table is nodding. They don't agree with the leader. They're buying career insurance. Yes, boss. Of course, boss. That's right, boss, right?
Okay.
So you have to go to some trouble to say, listen, I've been wrong before. Let me tell you when. I may be wrong here. What do you see that's different? What, you know, where am I missing something? What would you do if this was your decision? But you have to work hard to make it safe for people to dissent, because otherwise people will shape and manipulate information, even if you don't ask them. They will shape and manipulate information so it fits what they think are your prejudices, even if they're not. So as a leader, you have to work very hard to make that an open conversation, to encourage that kind of dissent, to make it safe for people to disagree with you. And then the last thing is you have to make sure that even if you're skeptical about some things, that you're putting small bets down. You're experimenting in these new areas and learning so the future doesn't take you by surprise.
And you mentioned earlier, I heard you mention how those scenarios have a direct impact on the future of not only business but families and children. And that how does that connect? I can assume, and I can see how, especially when you're talking talent and you're talking people do the insurance for the job, just yes and okay, to make sure they job security. And then you have another generation coming behind, and they do the same thing, but they're, as you put it here, in prison to some degree with their creativity. So from you, how does the top not looking outside of the box affect society, not just the business, but society and the generations to come?
Well, when our organizations change slower than they should, that is a problem for all of society. Because what that means is those organizations are wasting society's resources, right? We entrust our resources. There's capital and talent tied up in these organizations. And when they're slow to change, it'd be wonderful if just instantly the dinosaurs died and the upstarts took over. That's not how it works. I mean, if you look at the evidence, for example, General Motors has lost market share, I think, in every year but 2 over the last 30 years. And then they got a bailout from the government. I'm not saying that was wrong, but what I will tell you is organizations don't just surrender and go off and die and something comes and takes the place. They have political connections, they have a lot of resources, they'll write off, they'll sell businesses, they can go years where they're slowly winding down, all the time mostly irrelevant. And so society pays a heavy cost when our organizations don't reinvent themselves. I think the people working in those organizations pay a cost. Consumers pay a cost because we're not getting the best innovation. And so, you know, and by the way, a lot of those big companies, you know, we talk so much about Silicon Valley, but here's the fact. A greater percentage of employees work in large companies today than ever before. The number of startups is actually coming down in America, not up. And so we have an economy that's becoming actually less vital and not more so. And all this data, I can kind of give you chapter and verse. And there are a lot of economists who are quite concerned about this. Because when they're threatened by all these newcomers, the Ubers and the Netflix and so on, what do the big companies do? They merge and they get even bigger.
Yeah.
And they do that not to serve you better as a customer. They do that so they have more power in Washington, more power in Brussels. They can go to the regulators. They can slow the pace of change down. They can put barriers in the way of newcomers. Right? Look at right now. Our government right now, at this moment in the United States, we're trying to challenge hospitals to be more transparent in their prices. So we can make smarter choices as consumers so we can get better value. Every major hospital organization has come out against more pricing transparency for customers.
Wow.
And so that's the challenge. You know, big business, when big business sits down with big government, your interests are not on the table, I can assure you, right? They're thinking about how do they protect their markets and how do they slow change down. So yeah, when we have organizations that are not resilient and are not creative, all of society pays for it.
I've seen the mergers for those newcomers that are coming in terms of entertainment and viewing and streaming and all that for the purpose of control and maybe, or power, as you put it. I'm totally familiar with what you're talking about. For the employee, that's the management. I don't know if you've had any concentration or any thought for those that do have ideas. Those lay individuals that are trying to make sure they get a paycheck to take home to their families, they are dying because they are considered brainless for management in some of these scenarios. What is your advice to these people?
You know, my first advice is start by making an investment in your own creative capital. Go out. You may have no intention of starting a business, but go out and start to read. There's a lot of wonderful things written. Some of them I've written about how you think like an innovator. Make that investment. Learn how to get at those unarticulated needs of your customers. Learn how to think creatively about the business model. But improve. Give yourself the chance of having a high impact idea and invest in your own kind of business thinking and your business creativity. And there are plenty of books out there that can help you do that. I would say that's number one. Number two, when you have an idea, resist the urge to take it to your boss. Right? Because the problem with that old hierarchy is at any one level, it's like the old Soviet Union, at any one level, one boss has to say is like, "Nyet, we're not going to do this," and the idea dies.
Right.
So before you take a half-formed, fledgling idea up, go sideways. See if you can find 2 or 3 or 4 of your colleagues and say, "Hey, do you think this would work? Does this seem like a reasonable idea to you?" If you can get those people to show up on a Saturday morning, to help you write a little paper about it, do up a spreadsheet, build a little prototype, but put some energy into well, how would that work? If you're willing to do that and you have an idea that people will help you with, then you go back, because then it's not me. Hey, we have a dozen people now, and guess what? We already are experimenting with this. So see what you can do within your scope of permissions. Try to test that idea in the simplest possible way. See if anything interesting happens, and then go talk about it. Because leaders, it's very easy for a leader to say no to one person with an ill-formed idea. It's very hard to say no when you have a dozen people who've already put in some sweat equity, who already tested it in some kind of small way. Then you're much more likely to get a positive hearing. But don't assume you're helpless, because you're not.
And we are out of time, but Gary Hamel, do this. Google just the name, Gary, GaryHamel. The insight, the information, his quotes are phenomenal. Thank you. You've added a lot to me.